We would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we record this podcast, the Gadigal people. This is their land, never ceded, always sacred, and pay respects to the elders past, present and emerging of this place. Coming up on Remarkable Insights.
I was called back into the principal's office and she genuinely looked devastated and she said, look, the organisation says you can't do this now because you're disabled, you're blind. And that was the first time I realised the world might see me differently.
Surprise! We had so much fun talking with Minnie Baragwanath that we couldn't contain it to just one episode. So here is a spontaneous part 2. In this episode, we speak about how Minnie accidentally became the first person in the world to have an ebook and her experience growing up with disability. So firstly, Minnie, I understand that you received your diagnosis at quite a young age, and soon after you met a doctor who changed your life by introducing you to new technology.
No, you're so right. Absolutely. I was so lucky that when I was given my diagnosis, I was sent to the hospital. So I grew up in a town called Palmerston North in New Zealand. The ophthalmologist who diagnosed me then sent me off to a specialist at the hospital, Leslie Bolton. And I still remember this so vividly, walking into this beautiful room, because hospitals on the whole aren't, known for their beauty. But I think it was because I remember there was sunlight coming in and she had this sunny personality and she was all about what I probably now call possibility thinking. She was only focused on what was possible. She was always looking for different ways and different solutions, different technology that could support her patients. And in this case, me as a, 15-year-old. And, this was in about 1985. And so it was really, it was kind of pre-computers in a way. There were probably a few emerging. But she had the most extraordinary array of magnification equipment and some of the most extraordinary technology for me to try out, particularly in the classroom, because the big issue for me was, as my sight deteriorated, by this stage, I was virtually unable to read books and I certainly couldn't see anything on the blackboard and I couldn't see using overhead projectors, which are a thing of the past now. And so you can imagine that made accessing schooling really difficult. I was a very keen student. I loved learning, but I felt sort of these barriers were kind of coming into play. And so we trialled all this equipment. She'd send me back to school with magnifiers and like little telescoped kind of things to look at the blackboard with, and this piece of technology that was like a handheld device that I could run across my books, because it was just like this red light and it was a single line of text. But you had to keep your hand really still because you were actually literally running this camera over the page, one word, one line at a time. It drove me absolutely bonkers insane because it was so slow and cumbersome. But nonetheless, these were all the precursors to kind of the technology that we now have available. So some of it worked, some of it didn't. Look, it's fair to say none of it could bridge the gap, I guess, of my sight loss. So everything took me maybe incrementally closer, but none of it, unfortunately, was like, and here's the thing that will really put you on a level playing field. But as I said, it was a process of elimination. It was also at a time where technology was evolving quite rapidly. Certainly today, if I was a 15-year-old going into the, getting this diagnosis and heading into the classroom, the kind of tools that are available are just, they're in a different league. There's no comparison. When I was studying, I went to university quite young, and one of the ways we got around the fact that I chose to do English literature, goodness knows what I was thinking. There is so much reading in English literature. But my darling mother would read as many books as she could. She brought us up pretty much on her own at that point and was working full time. So it wasn't easy for her, but she would sit in her bed and read the novels I had to read onto audio cassette and post them to me at university, which was extraordinary. My earliest audio books were my mother reading to me. And there were these funny moments where she'd spill her tea or something. She'd go, bugger, I've just spilled the tea or something in the middle of the book.
It's such a good example of how your mum would record her voice and essentially give you the first prototype of an audiobook.
Yes.
Was that something that you told your classmates or your teachers that you were doing?
Oh my God, no. Isn't that funny? I don't think it would have occurred to me. Isn't that interesting? I think it's possible I didn't tell anyone. Probably my flatmates would have known, I guess. No, and I think a lot of that was I felt that I had to nut a lot of the stuff out on my own. It was tricky. It was very tricky. And I think part of the way I probably responded, and probably to some extent still do, although hopefully I've learned a few other strategies to ask for help now, but is to go inward and think, now, how can I do this? What do I need to do to get through? I mean, so I think I feel lucky that I seem to have a disposition that is focused on, there's got to be a way. There's always got to be a solution. I've just got to look at this differently. And I have always had the ability to think laterally, I guess, in terms of a situation. Sometimes I think I've had to wait until I was nearly at breaking point to discover what that was. But that sort of desire inside of me to persevere, to keep on trying and trying and trying, must have been instilled in me somewhere really early on in my life.
And is that a narrative that you experienced a lot when you had your diagnosis?
So yes, I did. And I noticed that the world quickly fell into two categories. There were the people who couldn't seem to imagine for one moment what I could now do or what they perceived I couldn't do. And I really stress that because I think that was more about their limitation and their worldview than mine. But the problem is if there are people in power, if there are teachers or employers or whomever, that limited worldview can be incredibly destructive. The other side of it is my Dr. Leslie Bolton worldview, which is the possibility. It's just a matter of looking at this differently and using some imagination and being creative. And so I talk about the people who have a possibility worldview and the people who don't. Or I talk about the people who are with you as an access citizen and the people who are not with you. The first time that really happened was when I was selected to represent the school on this amazing boat adventure that high school students would be selected for. And there was often only one student per school. And you'd go away with a group of other students for a week and sail all around, New Zealand. And I'd been selected, which was just extraordinary. And then about a week later, I was called back into the principal's office and she genuinely looked devastated. And she said, look, the organisation says you can't do this now because you're disabled, you're blind. And that was the first time I realised that the world might see me differently and in that moment limit my opportunities. And so that was gutting. I've never forgotten that moment and thinking, how am I going to navigate this if other people are so unimaginative?
I know language is super critical. And just for people listening, you like to use the term access community. I would love to unpack what that term means for people listening. And you think if people with disabilities or impairments were given the right access, that they wouldn't, experience disability in many ways.
That's it. Probably the first thing I'd say is I think, language is so powerful. Every social change movement comes with a shift in language. Language is how we make sense of the world around us and we communicate ideas and how we create shared frameworks for understanding and meaning creation. It's vital. So when we set Be Accessible up back in the day, everything in the world was around disability, and it was disability this, disability that. Absolutely fine, and I understand the social model. I know I've researched and studied the medical model, so I really get all of this. And I also respect if that's the language people choose to use. Be accessible. We didn't call ourselves Be Disabled or Be Disability. We called ourselves Be Accessible. It was a call to action. We want the world to be accessible. So we felt as a social change movement, it was vital that we had language that mirrored our intent. And I wanted us to work in a worldview that we were calling an accessibility worldview. And that was a worldview that believes that equality is possible. It's a worldview that actually says all of us at some time in our lives will have a disability or what I would call an access need. If we live long enough, every single one of us on this planet is likely to have some kind of impairment through aging. I also wanted language that was inclusive of everyone. Because the challenge I see with disability is that we often use it to denote a particular group over there. And I think it runs the risk of keeping us very binary, us and them, disabled, non-disabled. So accessibility was an endeavour to create a more spacious environment that can hold all of us. And I also noticed that one of the largest communities who have disability is the ageing population, baby boomers. I have yet to meet a baby boomer who is happy to call themselves disabled. They'll say, oh dear, I can't hear very well. This is my mum, or I can't walk or whatever, but I'm not disabled, I'm just getting older. And I thought, okay, so we need some language that invites them in. So this was sort of an invitation to kind of smooth off some of those edges. By making it a universal experience, that was also a critical part of our argument, is that by creating accessible businesses, schools, education, workplaces, customer experiences, actually we're creating a better world for all of us.
Minnie, thank you so much. You have been absolutely brilliant.
Thanks, Beef.
Thank you for coming.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you to our guest, and hopefully you found your own remarkable moment. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast and follow our Instagram at remarkable_tech for unheard moments from this episode. Talk with you all on the next one. If you're still here, I know I mentioned Instagram, but you can also follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and head to our website, www.remarkable.org. Bye for now.